I don't think it'll come as a surprise for my older viewers and even a lot of my new ones that the Souls series is my favourite of all time. I've played every game except for Demon's Souls Remake because PS5s are a myth, and I have strong feelings about pretty much all of them. For better and for worse, From Software created a juggernaut of gaming that has constantly been iterated on since the runaway success of Dark Souls in 2011. But the game I want to talk about is Elden Ring, the most recent entry in the Soulsborne catalogue, and except for Dark Souls 2, the most divisive. I want to talk about Elden Ring's endgame specifically, and that's simply because the early and mid-game is damn near flawless. But I've been thinking about Elden Ring a lot recently, especially since I almost never have any desire to play it anymore, which is really surprising to me. I can endlessly replay the other entries in the Soulsborne catalogue, so what is it about Elden Ring? It makes me think about its place in comparison to the other FromSoft games, but the one that keeps coming to mind is Bloodborne. I don't think it's any secret that Bloodborne is my favourite game of all time. Its combat is by far my favourite of the series, and its aesthetic is unmatched by other FromSoft titles. That being said, I consider Bloodborne's endgame to be also quite weak, especially in the base game and ignoring the Old Hunters DLC. So while it seems an unfair comparison to compare Bloodborne to Elden Ring, you need to understand that what I wanted from Elden Ring was for it to surpass Bloodborne as my favourite game ever. But it didn't, and even though I feel that their endgames are comparable, as I'll detail in a sec, Elden Ring's ruins the feel of the game, completely, for me, while Bloodborne's is simply lackluster. So, what I'm going to do in this video is break down the endgames of both Bloodborne and Elden Ring, point out what's different and what's similar. I do need to mention that I will be talking about both story and gameplay, so naturally there are going to be spoilers for both games, but I imagine if you're watching this video, then you've at least played Elden Ring, and I think the timer on spoiler warnings for a 7-year-old game like Bloodborne has run out long ago. But here's your warning anyway. Now, I think Elden Ring's early game is fucking perfect. The level of exploration and being able to go your own way is completely unparalleled, something that I thought no game was going to top the instant classic Breath of the Wild on doing. The interconnectedness of the early areas of Elden Ring is completely unparalleled. Finding shortcuts and hidden paths to areas you were sure were gated behind bosses feels like you're breaking the game's sequence, like you're doing something cheeky, and it's an incredibly rewarding experience for that. For example, the secret entrance to Dragon Barrow and the jumps that you can make to get behind Celia and completely circumvent it to get to the Church of the Plague really stands out to me as some peak exploration that an open world game should strive to be like. The freedom to explore, even without climbing like in Breath of the Wild, to forge your own path to areas is so fucking great to experience, even on subsequent playthroughs. I think this interconnectedness is really brought to a peak in Leyndell. Leyndell and its surrounding area is linked to so many new zones, it's actually astonishing. There is so much to do and explore that many can and do spend hours just discovering new areas that branch from it. I genuinely think that Leyndell is the original Souls level design philosophy brought to an open world game perfectly. The previous areas were also great, like the Celia skip I just mentioned, but it's so perfect here. Dungeons inside dungeons leading to new open areas. Exploring this zone was one of the greatest experiences I've had with a FromSoft game. Leyndell's parallel in Bloodborne is very clearly Cathedral Ward though. You are constantly looping back to Cathedral Ward, that it becomes more of a hub than the actual dream in a lot of ways. It's the most central location that virtually all areas branch from, in a way that mirrors Dark Souls 2, except that these legs loop back on themselves and intertwine in a perfectly natural way that feels like it's supposed to be the heart of Yharnam's community, which it was. The Healing Church was the most powerful organization in Yharnam, and its connection to virtually every area in the game demonstrates that. Not even the DLC escapes the influence of Cathedral Ward, since the amygdala that takes you to the Hunter's Nightmare is right outside Erden Chapel, and the Hunter's Nightmare itself is a warped reflection of the Cathedral Ward. Cathedral Ward is by far the most complex area in Bloodborne, and rightfully so, since it served so high a purpose in the pre-Beast Curse society. Likewise, Leyndell is the heart of the Lands Between, built by the roots of the Erd Tree, and is a symbol of Marika's might and influence. So, it has to be, by far, the most intricate level design in Elden Ring, perhaps even in FromSoft's entire catalogue. Which is all the more baffling to me how FromSoft nailed it so hard in the first 3/4 of the game's questline, only to fumble across the finish line. The exploration of the late game areas is woefully underdone, with the entire mountaintops of the Giants being virtually a straight line with like 3 deviations really. Castle Sol, the consecrated snowfield, and maybe it's just 2. The minor Erd Tree, I guess. Farum Azula is a maze, but really a straight line unless you want to go on a useless detour with the worm faces. The Mergwan Palace grounds are equally linear, with only a clusterfuck of crows and worthless crap, some easy rune farming and a straight shot that you can just run through in like 3 seconds to get to Moog. It's so easy to run through that I use it to get a +10 weapon before I even fight Godric. And don't even get me fucking started on the consecrated snowfield. For how gigantic that area is, there's virtually nothing worth exploring. The entire area is basically just run in a straight line through a blizzard because we didn't fucking learn from the frozen outskirts, and then get to Ordina to do a boring, annoying trial and get to the Halig Tree. There's also a warp gate to the Mergwan Palace grounds, I guess, but I'll talk about why that's not great in a sec. And once you arrive at the Halig Tree, sure, it's visually impressive, but it's really even more of a straight line. The only real detour through it is the alleyway, which is filled with revenants, so fuck that. And naturally, the Halig Tree is also a dead end. Not really a deal breaker, but it's strange considering every other area is linked to more than one. Another big problem that I have is that after the Erd Tree has been burned, the ash is contained to within the walls of Leyndell. Fucking what? This fucking tree is gigantic. You can see the fucker from every point on the map that's above ground. There should be ash everywhere, instead of just an ember particle effect in the air. Let the player explore the burning wreck of the old world. Put ash in other places and let the map change based on what the player did. Like with killing Radahn. The star falling out of the sky and blasting a hole in Limgrave is awesome. Can't we have that, but on an even bigger scale? This would make such a massive difference for comparatively not that much effort. Locking certain areas, flushing out dungeon bosses that would otherwise have been trapped behind mountains of ash, the possibilities are endless. Let the player feel the impact of what they did to the world in pursuit of becoming Elden Lord. Instead, it's limited to Leyndell, which should be as fucked up as it is, for sure. But being limited to there just feels like after the Erd Tree burned, the first thing Godfrey did was go out with a broom and sweep it all up, before chilling in Marika's room and playing Xbox to wait for us. Bloodborne has a major advantage in this regard, that the map actually does change based on the player's actions. When you've stockpiled enough insight, amygdalas appear throughout the map to show the player that even the world they knew wasn't the whole picture. We take this even further when we kill Vicar Amelia and Rom, and the night changes colour, going from blue to black to red with the cycles of the moon. Not only does it give the night sky a sense of foreboding as you progress, but it also changes enemy behaviour. During the black night of the new moon, some enemies will be asleep and you can sneak past them. This is the kind of consequences I wanted to see so much more of in Elden Ring. As I said before, burning the Erd Tree is a huge deal, and we should see the consequences of that everywhere. Same as Bloodborne, where changing the stage of the night is not limited to a single area. Let the player's actions have consequences. Let the player, who is on the path to effectively become a god, have the impression that the things they do have weight. Now this is more of a gripe of the world design as a whole, and this gets memed on a lot, but something that I see criticized a lot is the use of recycling enemies and bosses in Elden Ring. Now, some recycling is natural. All of FromSoft's previous games have had enemy and boss recycling, but it's been done in very careful ways that you can justify there being more than one of a boss. Taurus and Capra demons showing up later in DS1, the Pursuer actually pursuing you in DS2, the Dragon Slayer armor in DS3, the multitude of elite samurai in Sekiro, the shadows of Yharnam in Bloodborne, the list goes on. The issue with it in Elden Ring is that there are so many of the same enemies and bosses copy-pasted, guarding often quite insignificant loot that you wonder why they bothered. I genuinely think that Elden Ring is the first open world game I've ever seen where I thought that maybe there was just too much stuff. And not that I think a multitude of stuff is bad, but where you have so much stuff that it actively bores the player who wants to explore all of it and runs into the 6th fucking magma worm or another fucking Leonine misbegotten? And it can't be danced around any longer. Copy-pasting story bosses like Godric and Estelle is completely unforgivable in my eyes. There is no story explanation that justifies that to me. It really does rip me right out of the game that I can find another goddamn Godric in an Everjail. You can call him Godofroy all you like and attempt to give him a backstory, but I am physically incapable of suspending so much disbelief to think that it's anything other than just a copy-paste for more content in this already groaning smorgasbord of shit to do. Repeating the climactic boss of Ranni's entire questline in a side dungeon is likewise ridiculous. This is a defining moment of many people's playthrough, and a boss many will think is unique thanks to its name. And for Elden Ring to go back on that and say, oh yeah, there's just another one in a cave and it's also called Estelle, is really just insulting. I've seen people like VadiVidia say that they must belong to a species called the Estelle, but then the translation department has even more shit to answer for if that is the case. Another thing often criticized is the excess of warp gates and magic teleporting coffins that really dampens the whole exploration thing late into the game. I keep coming back to Dark Souls 1 in this regard. The world design of those early to mid game levels is just art. Everything is so intricately interconnected that I think FromSoft has really shot themselves in the foot for not living up to that in subsequent titles. Even DS1's predecessor, Demon's Souls world design, was very arcadey. Each series of levels in its own contained area with no real shortcuts. Just a straight line with the Nexus as a central hub detached from the whole thing. The late game areas of DS1 were extremely linear too, but with that beautiful early game design to fall back on. DS2 was like a giant spider with long, linear legs sprawling from medulla, and DS3 was one long path with branches off that. Bloodborne really brought back that interconnectedness in a big way, with surprising connections between many different zones. The major one that comes to mind being the path linking the Forbidden Woods and Yosefka's clinic. And, while not traversable, the fact that all the Nightmare Realms are physically next to each other in the same space is so awesome. Thinking about the late game areas in Bloodborne specifically, the shortcuts are so deliberately placed as rewards for progression. Take the elevators in the Nightmare of Mensis, for example. When you first start out in the Nightmare of Mensis, you first have to run into the building from outside, constantly being shot at by the brain of Mensis, dodging spiders and Edgar once you do get inside, and finally, after the hell that you've gone through, you find an elevator back to a lamp outside. A convenient shortcut that becomes even nicer as when you progress to just before Mikolash, you find another elevator that takes you to the same lamp. Then, when you get past Mikolash, you get another, and this elevator even has a secret jump leading to some of the best blood gem farming outside of the Chalice dungeons anyway. And you get to drop the brain down a hole, and you get a blood rock. And once we progress to the top and are just about to face Murgo's wet nurse, we get another elevator to take us back to the cage one. Do you see what I mean about the progression being linked to traversal? Instead of simply plonking bonfires after every boss, giving you a simple checkpoint, the level now has opened itself up more, which is way more tangible a reward to me. It really stresses careful exploration of the level, and instead of taking it for granted that you're going to get a checkpoint after every boss, you now have to pay far more attention to side passages for shortcuts and let your progress be saved by not only your skill in fighting, but also attention to detail. DS1 and 2 were also like this, since you didn't get boss bonfires at all. Leyndell does this too, by the way. Even though you do get boss bonfires, they're only at the end of all this exploration, so you do need to find these shortcuts to save your progress with. There are so many great shortcuts to discover in Leyndell, it's actually shocking. Honestly, considering the painstaking level design of Leyndell, it's actually a tragedy it gets buried at the end of the game. But now, let's think about the late game areas of Elden Ring. Are there cool shortcuts that are useful in the slightest? Any ways that the level reveals more of itself in interesting ways? Apart from the one elevator in the Haley tree that FromSoft patched out that allowed you to skip the entire level, no. Not a single area rewards exploration like this. The game, once again, reverts to a series of checkpoints, which isn't bad in itself, but when Elden Ring itself uses the most staggering level design in FromSoft's entire catalog, it really hurts that it can't be universal. This all compounds to completely dampen the mood of the entire last act of the game for me. Instead of, oh man, what do I choose between taking the safer route through Stormvale, or risk the bullet hell and go quicker, or damn, dude, I forgot that there was so much upgrade stuff in Leyndell. Instead it's, oh, this area is not worth dicking around in the slightest. All the rewards are not worth the time, or the runes I might lose. Or even just burning the runes you do have to do a suicide run to grab an item because you know you're not making it out alive. And that is the most scathing thing that I could say about the late game levels. Choosing to either skip exploring entirely, or not even bother with combat and just let yourself die because it's easier. Besides progression, going through these levels is just not worth it. Let's talk about combat. I want to open up this discussion by talking about Bloodborne first, because Bloodborne's combat is fucking perfect. You've likely seen a bazillion essays going into the nitty-gritty of why its combat is the best in FromSoft's catalog, but just for the rare few still waiting for Bloodborne to come out on PC, you can give up because it'll never happen, so you can just watch this instead. Bloodborne's combat is the peak of aggression in a way no other game I've seen has managed, except maybe Doom 2016 and Eternal. In fact, the design philosophy between the two series is remarkably similar. The main question at the heart of both is this: how can we incentivize the player to rip and tear as much as possible? And rather predictably, the answer is to allow the player to stay in the fight for the entire time. Bloodborne accomplishes this through the quick step and rally mechanics, but also some other important pieces I'll go into in a sec. Quick steps are an incredibly important part of Bloodborne's dance in that they are so much faster than rolls. In Bloodborne, you can roll, but I almost never do because I want to be in my enemy's face. Best way to do that is to iframe through an attack and keep smacking without losing positioning. And if you flub a dodge or take some other damage, you can hit the enemy and regain a portion of that through rallying. What I really love about rally is just how thematic it is. Not only do you get to make those mistakes, but it further incentivizes the aggression. If you want that health back, you gotta kill for it. It's perfect for the hunt. Parrying is likewise one more aspect that allows you to stay up close and personal. Shooting your opponent in the middle of an animation might seem easier than parrying with a shield, but unless you're right in front of your opponent, your bullet can miss, or the travel time means that you miss the window if you're far away. Ironically, the safest place to shoot your gun is right in front of the enemy. And besides maybe 3 exceptions, being the cannon, church cannon, and Evelyn, guns are not for damage. They're tools for parrying. Even healing and item use is pitch perfect in Bloodborne. Blood vials take almost no time at all to use, but an opponent with a fast trigger finger can actually parry you out of healing. It's rare in PvE, limited to Hunter NPC fights and Lady Maria, but when it actually happens, it's a shock. Usually a lethal one too. but everything combat related is quick and fluid, designed with doing things in the middle of fighting in mind, staying right in front of the enemy and feeling comfortable doing all your actions while doing so. By contrast, Elden Ring wants to be a slower, more deliberate game than previous Souls titles. Estus is back, in virtually the same animation as Estus had in DS3, and spell and item use is slow and deliberate. Enemies likewise have extremely exaggerated delays on their attacks, and this leaves long windows between hits where you can capitalize on openings if you know hit timings. Theoretically. The most major issue with this philosophy, while great on paper, is that Elden Ring seems to be built on a more co-op playstyle. While not inherently a bad thing, the way it's implemented is horrible. This is speculation on my part since I'm not a game dev at FromSoft, but I think that with the implementation of spirits and co-op partners now being on demand, the AI needs to be more aggressive to keep up. This leads to my first major gripe: animation reading. Zully the Witch demonstrated that technically, input reading isn't what is happening in Elden Ring. They actually react to the first frame of a new animation. Kind of animation reading. Honestly, this is even worse. The addition of animation reading completely subverts the philosophy a lot of bosses seem to go for, with the delayed openings for combos and longer windows to hit. While attacking, healing, pretty much anything results in being locked into an animation with no way to cancel for the player, the fact that enemies can read those animations and instantly punish is just fucking obnoxious. What the result ends up being is that, especially as a projectile caster, many enemies will cancel out of recovery windows to dodge your attacks, or counter with an attack of their own. The issue with this is twofold. There's no way to react in a similar way since you're locked into an animation with no way to cancel, and that bosses can hit you much harder than you can hit them. As I mentioned, this is to balance out the fact that you can co-op all the time, but the thing is, the AI is always like this. It doesn't turn on animation reads once you summon a co-op player, or a spirit, but it's simply like this all the time. And of course, what this means is that if you want to play a solo playthrough, as I usually do, then you are actively punished for it in a way that doesn't seem fair. And I mean fair in a very specific way. I've been playing these games for a long time. Difficulty is not an issue in itself, it's how they're difficult. Ornstein and Smo are difficult because it's hard to juggle two bosses at once, to get space between them so that you can attack your target. Gehrman is difficult because he's fast and he hits hard, but his openings are clear and you can parry him. Orphan, of course, is difficult because he hits like a fucking truck and is frenetic with his attacks, but has clear openings and you can parry him. Malenia is hard because she reads animations almost instantly. She really does feel like if you bring a slower weapon to the fight, you're gonna get fucked. So you don't even have the build freedom. Some builds are clearly better than others thanks to her animation reading. And you don't even get the staggers with heavy weapons half the time because some attacks have hyper armor and some don't, and it's not clear at all which is which. Her most devastating attack, Waterfowl Dance, is nigh impossible to dodge all of if you're next to her too. She can even Waterfowl Dance as an animation read of an attack, blending you into a paste for daring to attack her while she stands there and does nothing. Which of course means that when you get her to around 2/3 of her health, the fight suddenly becomes this game of chicken, where you're daring her to waterfowl just to get it out of the way, so that you're not stuck in an attack when she winds up for it. And I've seen the speedrun strats, I've seen people walk around her waterfowl like she's nothing. I'm not talking about people that are able to play this game full time and perfect everything. I'm a normal guy with a job. I can't invest that kind of time. It is shocking that so many bosses actively break the rules that most bosses follow, and that clearly I'm expected to know AI manipulations or high-level dodging techs instead of expecting the boss to follow the rules of the game that I, as the player, and the majority of bosses as well, have to follow. As a result, it really highlights the ones that do follow the rules and makes them look so much better by comparison. I think that Mohg is one of the best bosses in the game for this exact reason. He follows rules. He has hard-hitting moves, and while he can mix up his combos to keep you from getting greedy, he has clear openings after them that even with big weapons, you can capitalize on them. And this is really how the endgame of Elden Ring goes, boss-wise. Some bosses, like Mohg, or Godfrey/Horlu, are fucking brilliant. Whereas some bosses, like Malenia, feel like they should be in a completely different kind of game where you can animation cancel. Radahn feels like a blend of the two, honestly. His instant teleports that also have an AoE are super annoying. Not enough to kill most of the time, but damaging enough that any follow-up you get caught by may kill you. For something with almost no warning or reaction window, that's really nasty. Plus, he also has animation reads, but only after a cooldown once his combos finish. And he has plenty of openings to hit him while he whiffs his own hits. I actually really like the Radahn fight. It finally feels more like the way the animation reads were intended. To punish greedy heals and make sure that you're not getting too comfortable. The thing is, virtually all of Bloodborne's bosses are like this, but without the animation reading. In a game where getting hit by pretty much any attack can be devastating, Bloodborne's bosses tread a fine line of being extremely aggressive, but no more than you can reasonably handle within the limitations you have. Think about the Ludwig fight, for example. This guy is insanely aggressive, wildly swinging in a very animalistic way that you need to learn to capitalize on. He hits like a fucking freight train, but it's completely avoidable as long as you follow his rules. Dodge under this jump, dodge into this swing, run away when he crawls on the roof. The rules are communicated in non-verbal ways, and you learn through punishment. But, more importantly, he doesn't break his rules in a way that is convenient in keeping himself alive. And, when he shifts into phase 2, his moveset completely changes, but this philosophy does not change. His more focused and chivalric way of fighting doesn't make him less devastating, but it also doesn't break the rules set by the first phase, or the game as a whole. He has clear openings after combos that you can take advantage of and get him down. This really is the basis for designing a Souls boss as a whole, but Ludwig really demonstrates clearly how something that seems insurmountable at the start is doable once you allow yourself to learn and strategize. The Hunter fights in particular show this perfectly. Combat becomes more of a dance, closing distance to get hits in, attempting parries, needing to back off and heal, all while minding where the hunter is and how much time you have. Lady Maria takes this dance to new heights in the best spectacle fight in the entire FromSoft catalog, adding blood, then fire to her attacks to punish staying at a distance, parryable flurries when up close, the ability to parry you herself. Her fight is a deadly waltz of stepping in and out to kill each other. Often, of course, is a frantic struggle to stay in control, and while being completely parryable in both phases, it far from trivializes him. His aggression more than matches your ability to control the fight, and a single misstep can leave you scrambling to recover and make mistakes he can capitalize on. They really are the final exam of Bloodborne. How much have you learned about the combat, and how can you use your technique to come out on top of enemies who are absolutely fucking relentless in trying to sit you the fuck down? Of course, Elden Ring has bosses like this too, but a lot of the time it really feels like the game goes out of its way to flatten you. The meme of 60 levels in HP is only around because the damage of late game enemies is so ridiculously punishing. The popularity of Mohgwyn's Dynasty Palace entrance, farming, shows this. It feels like you need to grind in a way that has never been a thing to anywhere near the same extent in a FromSoft game, and level so that you can out DPS enormously inflated health pools and survive overinflated damage. Sometimes the damage feels fair, sometimes it doesn't, and it all comes down to the boss and their behavior. Do they follow the rules of the combat they're supposed to be a part of, or do they break the rules of the combat in a way that is frustrating? We've already talked about the worst one, but there are certainly good ones too. Godfrey and Moog I mentioned earlier, but also Radahn. Radahn, while being a relatively early game boss for Elden Ring, is perfect. Absolutely flawless. A fantastic and tragic story combined with an incredibly fair fight considering the damage coming at you. He has a relatively narrow range of attack combos with enough variety to catch you if you aren't paying attention, perfect ramp ups in damage and difficulty, and of course the dive bomb into full scale gravity magic phase complete with flying boulders to punish you for getting too far away. Radahn is a perfect example of how amazing the boss quality of Elden Ring can be, not only in the fairness of the fight, but also the freedom that you have in the ways that you can fight him. He doesn't feel like one build is better than another at all, and not only that, but you can also opt for the spectacle and summon multiple NPCs and lead an entire army into battle. Radahn really is the perfect Elden Ring boss in this regard. But then there's Elden Beast, who just feels wrong. It's like a part of the fight is missing, and I think the vast majority of us know which part. Torrent. The fact that Torrent is not summonable for this fight is nothing short of either an omission because they couldn't get it to work, or a mistake to the point where Elden Beast doesn't feel like a complete fight in its current iteration. The addition of Torrent would suddenly make this fight make a lot more sense. The movement of the boss suits Torrent's much faster movement speed, as well as his ability to jump over some of the attacks that Elden Beast throws at you while you scramble to catch up to it. And its large AoE thing that requires jumps to get out of, and running away from Elden Stars, all of these things that I, and a lot of people I've spoken to, hate about Elden Beast would be fixed with this simple addition. At least conceptually. I'm not a game dev, and I don't know why he wasn't implemented. Not only this, but Elden Beast literally appears from nowhere. There is no hint about it, which in lore makes sense because Marika sure as shit wasn't going to tell anyone about it, and neither was Radahn. But it really does mean that when Elden Beast just fucking ominously rises into view, it's like, wait, what? Instead of, oh shit, it's this guy! The gravitas is completely gone. Even though Elden Beast is visually the most gorgeous arena in the entire series, it really is just a gold leaf on a turd. Nothing about it has any weight other than its fight music being the start screen music. And we could say the same about Radahn too, except that he's been built up the entire game, and we know he's coming. From a storytelling perspective, why the fuck would you have the final boss be something we have no idea about? Just for fun, let's also consider the final bosses of other Soulsborne games. Demon's Souls has King Allant, or false King Allant I guess, who started the whole mess by trying to commune with the old Great One. DS1 of course we have Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, who built the Age of Fire. DS2 we have Queen Lysandra, who pushed us to take the Throne of Want so she could kill us and take it for herself. DS3 we have the Soul of Cinder, an amalgamation of all previous Lords of Cinder and every player who has ever linked the fire. And, if we want to include him, Gale, the Slave Knight who consumed every human in the world to reform the Dark Soul. And to bring back the comparison, we have Bloodborne with Gehrman, the Keeper of the Hunter's Dream, and his master and host, the Moon Presence. Even Sekiro, with Ishin the Sword Saint being resurrected. All of these are characters we have emotional ties to and want to fight. I guess Soul of Cinder is kinda out of nowhere, but once you see it in action it makes complete sense. And Elden Ring came so close. Radahn and Marika had been built up over the entire game. We knew the final fight would be against them. Why not have Radahn surrender his body and have the final boss be Marika? That would make so much more sense and be a fight we are actually invested in. It's genuinely shocking to me just how wrong they got Elden Beast, and once again the clear comparison is Bloodborne. The base game endgame bosses are where Bloodborne really falls apart, and the entire part of Yahar'gul and the Nightmare of Mensis is just not great in the boss department. The one Reborn is just Tower Knight but gross, and beyond its visual spectacle is really boring. Mikolash is entertaining the first time, but after that is similarly boring, especially if you fight him legit and don't do the poison knife cheese. Murgo's wet nurse is an absolute pushover who can barely even hit you a lot of the time. She's aesthetically awesome, but I just wish she was tougher. So much for the guardian of a great one. And even going back a bit, Rom isn't great either. More interesting than the bosses who come after, sure, but she's not exactly a showcase of how great the combat can be. And after a whole bunch of not great bosses in a row, Gammon is here to kick it back up into awesome. God damn, Gammon is good, and really goes to show just how perfect the combat of Bloodborne is when it's between two hunters. He's the perfect test of all you know in the game. Do you know how to parry? Do you know how to quick step through his hits to get a combo of your own? When is a good time to back off and heal without him parrying you out of it? His fight is a perfect ending to the game, except that it isn't the end. The Moon Presence comes directly after the fight with Gammon and fills a similar role in the story as Elden Beast. It's the true power manipulating Gammon, as the Elden Beast is for Radahn. But mechanically, Moon Presence was clearly built with the speed and agility of the player in mind. Its devastating AoE that obliterates all of your health is mitigated by its standing still to let you rally your health back. It's fast and hits relatively hard, but it's not super difficult. But this is also helped by Gammon actually staying dead. It's not a two-phase boss fight, it's just the Moon Presence afterwards. If you want to, you can mark out and restock on items and Gammon will stay dead. No such luck with Elden Beast. Actually, why does Radahn come back? In the cutscene, we see Elden Beast pull Radahn under the surface of the water and then produce what is clearly a sword made of a body. Not only does Elden Beast do some fucked up body horror to Radahn, just some real I have no mouth and I must scream shit, but if we lose, he then has to go through that again? I feel like becoming a mansword should not be something you can just come back from, you know? Kind of fucked up. And also annoying because it means that when you face Elden Beast and lose, which is very possible considering that the fight just isn't finished, then you have to go through fucking Radahn again. Take the fucking hint from Gammon and just stay dead, Radahn. Jesus. Now, I wouldn't say that Moon Presence is a great boss by any means, but at least it's one that has been built up over the course of the game's story, particularly near the end if you know what you're looking for. We know that each dream or nightmare realm requires a great one to act as a host for it to exist. The Nightmare Frontier, as well as the Nightmare of Mensis, exists thanks to Murgo. The Hunter's Nightmare exists thanks to Kos, and now we see that the Hunter's Dream exists thanks to the Moon Presence. And once we kill the Moon Presence, we finally achieve what we wanted from the very start, to transcend. We become an infant Great One after we have sought out Pale Blood. And, since we're on the subject, let's talk about Bloodborne's endings. I talked about the true ending already, but the other ones are also worth mentioning. The first is the most simple one to explain. Gammon cuts our head off in the dream, and we wake up under the morning sun. We're free from the dream, but presumably the hunt will continue again once the sun goes down. Clearly, this is a bad ending once you think about it. We achieved nothing after all the work we did. We took the easy way out, and it's very likely the whole reason we came to Yharnam cannot be accomplished now. Plus, you can't die and resurrect in the dream anymore. If you're killed, it's now permanent, or you just succumb to bloodlust and become like the beasts you hunted. The second ending is more like it. Also a bad ending, but instead we take Gammon's place as the host of the dream and emissary to the Moon Presence. It's likely we will also have the same fate as him too. All of these endings are really impactful not only to the world, but to us as a character. Now compare this to Elden Ring's endings. The majority of endings in Elden Ring are so much weaker by comparison, it's just sad. Pretty much all of the restoration endings, where the Elden Ring is restored, are just our character sitting on the Elden Throne with different coloured sky. Of course, this is a simplistic interpretation. Each of the 4 ways to restore the Elden Ring has its own connotations and what the world will look like going forward, But the issue I have is that we never see it. It's not even an ambiguous thing like in the Souls games. We vaguely know what the Ages of Fire and Dark look like. The games take place in the transition between the two. The restoration of the Elden Ring has such sweeping consequences that we really should be able to see and explore at least a little bit of it, surely. These endings are by far the least popular ones too, going by the Steam achievement page. You know which ones are great though? Ranni's ending and the Frenzied Flame ending. Ranni's ending falls into the same trap as Elden Lord, where it's very vague as to what's actually happening, but I should note that it is far clearer in the Japanese version as to what Ranni actually wants, which makes the English translation utterly bizarre. But her ending is visually striking, and we, as a player who has completed her entire quest to get this ending, are also emotionally invested to a much higher degree than seeing our characters sit in a big chair. And the Frenzied Flame ending is just so sick. Watching the whole world burn as we revel in the flames is such an amazing visual. And to top it off, if you inherited the flame before Malenia used herself as kindling to burn the Erd tree, she appears in what are presumably our ashes and fishes out Torrent's ring. You know what? You can see my reaction to it yourself. Oh yeah! It's only despair for like a couple of seconds because the world's gonna burn. Black hole face. Oh boy. Oh, Melon is here. Oh no, I betrayed Torrent!
Lord of Frenzied Flame. I will seek you as far as you may travel.
Oh shit!
Deliver you what is yours.
Oh shit!
And death.
Ah! Dude! That was a sick ending. But why don't all the endings have this level of gravitas? We get to see the world set aflame, so why can't we see the consequences of the other endings too? I don't know, man. It's just so frustrating to see how close the Elden Lord endings get to greatness, only to trip and spill their lunch all over the cafeteria floor as the cool endings laugh. All of this really coalesces to make Elden Ring's endgame kind of unenjoyable for me. I look at the start of Elden Ring and I love it with every fiber of my being. It has easily some of the best design within the Souls format that FromSoft has ever done. But, like many of their games, the back quarter of the game lets down the rest. So much so that I'll start a new file, get to Leyndell, beat Morgott, and then go, oh yeah, the rest of the game, and stop. I have several files at various stages of completion thanks to this. And for a game that many laud as one of the greatest of all time, I really hope you all understand why I had to make this video to try and figure that out. Of course, this is just my opinion. If you feel differently about the endgame of Elden Ring, please let me know in the comments. While you're down there, consider hitting subscribe too. I'd really appreciate the support as I move more into this long form video essay type stuff, which is way harder to make than Let's Plays. Also, a massive thank you to Jupiter for helping me proofread my script. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you, and I certainly would not have got this video out anywhere near as quickly. So thank you so much. Thank you for watching, both new and returning viewers, and I'll see you in the next video.